We can start with coaches here. We're going to convene this work session, and we're going to talk a little bit about the impact study we had done by Mr. Simon and Dr. Murphy.
Board members, first of all, let me thank you for allowing us to do this impact study. I think tonight we'll have some good information to present both to you and to our public so that we can sort of see our way forward with more clarity. I do want to tell you why we have chosen to do, is that you would?
It's not me. It is not me.
I do want to share with you why we chose to do an impact study and some of the things that we wanted to look at, and then I'm going to immediately pitch to Mr. Steve Salmon to walk us through the impact study. We really wanted to take a look at the enrollment history for Hoover City Schools and look at different grade configurations. We wanted to look at any changes that's taking place, particularly over the last 5 years in the grade configuration of K-5, 6-8, 9-12, and the entire K-12 spectrum. We also wanted to take a look at live births in Jefferson County and in Shelby counties and determine the ratio of those births to school enrollment 5 or 6 years later when they would be coming to us as kindergartners or as first graders. We wanted to look at the percentage of our students who are remaining in Hoover City Schools and transitioning from grade level to grade level. So how many of our kindergartners stay with us to get to first, and how many 11th graders stay with us to get to that senior year. We also wanted to look at population growth in Hoover to include a review of census data. We wanted to look also at building permits to include single and multifamily dwellings that have been issued for the city of Hoover. We've also taken a look at home sales in Hoover to include any new home sales and any resale of homes and how that might impact our thinking going forward. We also have taken a look at 28 residential developments. Those are the current developments in Hoover. We have a knowledge of those developments that have already completely built out and those developments that still have pending construction. And we need a plan, look at a plan for the impact of those remaining residential developments on our school district. We also have spent some time with Mr. Salmon talking about school capacity, with consideration being given for the future residential developments and the impact of that on any new schools and or extensions or expansions to our schools. And then sort of lastly, taking this impact study a step further, looking at the results of the data that you'll have this evening, and then board members having that inform us and assist us then as we look at district needs, and we'll also share with you this evening some associated costs as we look at going forward based on what we've learned from the terrific work from Mr. Salmon. So way more than I probably should have said, Mr. Salmon, but if I could have Mr. Steve Salmon come, and he is going to walk us through the impact study data. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure to be in Hoover. I will be through in about an hour, or maybe less. Yeah, but it's been a joy to be here and to work with everyone here. Had a lot of help. Where'd Ron go? I guess he's already gone home. But I've had a lot of help from him. We've had a lot of help from the city, planning department, permit department. I've personally had a lot of help, and I'm gonna say this right off. The Hoover Sun is one of the best papers to write about development I've ever seen. You've got 28 new developments, and I was able to find just about everything I wanted to in their articles going back several years. So whoever does that does a great job with that. What I'd like to do is go through this relatively fast. We've got history, population, and development data, which is going to be things that you have, and then we'll move into the projection part, which I created, and then the capacity analysis. You will have 4 sheets that really, those capacity analysis sheets kind of summarize everything that we have done. I think we talked about basically an hour. I think I'll be through within about 45 minutes. But I do tend to find this exciting stuff, even at my age. I had a principal one time tell me I must have a very low threshold for excitement. But I still think it's pretty exciting, even in the 70s. But anyway, want to start, and I want to explain. Ron wanted this board here. This is not a presentation board. This is my worksheet. So, you know, that's why it looks a little rough. It's what I use in my office to work. But what we have on here, these are your new 1819 middle school zones. I have overlaid the elementary zones. That way you can see the high school, the middle, and the elementary. And also you have these 28 developments. On here there are 3 numbers in blue where each one of those developments are, and those developments are numbered by the city, 1 through 28. You can see the total number of homes or units approved, total number already built, and the total number that are unbuilt at this point. So when you look at this map, I use this a lot in doing the enrollment projections, so I knew exactly what was coming in each one of the areas. And also the projections you're going to see are based on your new attendance zones. I actually told Ron and Kathy the other day, I wish they'd have called me beforehand. It'd have been a lot easier to have done it on your old zones, but Ron was able to give me the numbers on the potential number of kids to be moved. So the projections you see are based on your new attendance zone changes. One other brief thing before we start. I have done this a while. This is my 45th or 46th year in education, maybe 48th, I forgot. Late 60s either way. But in 74, when I decided to go back and get my degree, I went to the school planning lab at the University of Georgia. Married housing there was $15 a month, cheaper than it was at Auburn. And, you know, that's where the other planning lab was in the Southeast. I don't think any of y'all were buying family groceries, but $15 a month in 74 was a week's worth of groceries. So anyway, spent time there, and then I moved to Cobb County, working in this kind of stuff, planning facilities and so forth. And during the 12 years I was in Cobb County, Georgia, we grew anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 kids a year. So we did this live and then had to build all the buildings. I think I mentioned Mr. Kelly earlier. I think one year I rezoned 20,000 kids and couldn't go to church or the grocery store for a month. You know. Anyway, moving on. One of the things that I think you will see in all of these slides, your enrollment basically for the past 5 years has been relatively stable. These are your K-5 numbers, and all the charts you're going to see are K-5 numbers. You've got 60-something kids in pre-K, but I've not tried to project pre-K. That's a program financial decision, not a numbers projection decision. But you can see from 13-14 up to this current year, that number changed only about 30 in your K-5 numbers. Middle school number was actually down a little bit, 3291 in 13-14, and then 3232. High school number up a little bit, about 120 during that 5-year time frame. And then when you look overall, you can see that your overall increase, basically fairly level, but your overall increase was about 70 or 80 during that 5-year time frame. Now, I am an old math teacher. I love spreadsheets. I only have 4 or 5 in here, though, but there's several things that I want you to look at, and I want y'all to kind of understand how I came up with some of the numbers I do. When I'm creating a set of projections, I always try to look at the relationship between the live births in a county and their kindergarten and first grade enrollment 5 and 6 years later. If any of you have ever taken Education 101, that's one of the best predictors of kindergarten and first grade numbers, whether you're in a stable environment, a declining environment, or an increasing environment. And if you look, and this pointer doesn't work, but that K to B ratio that you will see is the ratio of your kindergarten to that same group of kids when they were born 5 years earlier. And I'd like to point out the last 2 lines. You can see that has been 8%, 8.78, 8.28. For the last 2 years, that's over 9%, 9.12 and 9.13. What that means, of all the kids born in Jefferson and Shelby County, y'all wound up getting over 9% of them in your kindergarten those years. And you basically got about the same thing on the first to birth ratio. You can see that number, though, from last year to this year, moved from 831 up to 906. So you are starting to see a little bit of an increase where it had been fairly stable for the previous 3-4 years. in the relationship of your kindergarten and first grade kids to the countywide live births. But here's what the births have done based on the year those kids would have entered first grade. And this is one of the reasons that your enrollment has remained steady over the last 5 or 6 years, as you saw in the other charts. Based on the year the kids, look at the kids when they would have entered first grade in 13-14. That was the peak for the combined Jefferson and Shelby births, 12,392. That number went down to 11,288 for this year. In other words, you had about 1,100 kids less born in both of the counties over that 5-year period than you had previously had. And then if you look at the kids entering 1920, you can see that number's down another 300. The blue numbers are actual numbers. The numbers in black are the numbers that I've used for the projections because of the growth that y'all have, the rest of Jefferson, the rest of Shelby. You'll be having, I think, some increase in those numbers. 3 more spreadsheets and I'll basically be through with those, but I want you to see the same thing that we talked about on your ratio of births to kindergarten and birth to first has actually happened in your grade to grade movement. These numbers, pointer doesn't work. If you look at that 2 to 1, that's the relationship of the kids that moved from first grade to second grade. In other words, this year you had 968 in your second grade, 946 in your first. That's a 102% increase if you see that 10233 number there. But for the past several years, that number's averaged about 98.5%, but it's up to 102. If you look at your third to second or second to third ratio, you'll see the same kind of thing. You've had a gradual increase every year for the last several years from 99 up to 102.75. Same thing again over on the third to fourth, and then the fourth to fifth. Goes all the way through. Here's your fifth to sixth. You can see that you actually had 4% more kids show up in your sixth grade this year than that same group when they were fifth graders. 2.5% increase on sixth to seventh, and then a little over 1% on seventh to eighth. And this is where whoever works with the middle school and high school people need to take a little bit of a bow. If you look at the 8th and 9th grade ratio, you have traditionally been about 8 or 9% more, or you have the last 2 years show up in your high school in your 9th grade than you had in the 8th grade. But then most school districts, when you start looking at the 9 to 10 ratio, the 10 to 11 ratio, and the 11 to 12 ratio, start falling off. You've got some districts in the state that number from 9 to 10 will be 70%, 75%. You've actually got a few that are 65%. Yours is average 95. In other words, you're only losing about 4.5% of the kids between 9 to 10th grade. Look at your 10th to 11th and your 11th to 12th. Those are phenomenal numbers. You're not losing any. You're right at 100%, 10 to 11. Once you get them in there, you are holding them, you're keeping them, the overall numbers. Now, you will have some dropouts, but overall, you will see this number. I actually work with a district now in managing their building program in Georgia that they actually lose, well, I don't need to say that. Never mind. We've been reported somewhere. Yeah, never mind. But it was a real good number. and then as we look, you will see the chart that you saw a while ago. This is where the numbers come. Again, very steady over the past several years. Another thing that's very steady in most school districts, even some close to you, you will see a lot of up and down in the grade to grade chart. But look at yours, almost a flat level line all the way across to the 9th grade. Now you've got that 968, but that's where you had one of those dips in the birth rate in that 2nd grade. But for the rest of that time, you're averaging right out 1,050 kids per grade level, which is very good to have that kind of stability, and you actually have the same thing pretty well through your high school. Now, one of the things I like to look at is the history. Everybody comes in here and everybody's ready to look at numbers with their own set of assumptions. I like to kind of have everybody on the same set of assumptions. During your high growth years back in the early 2000s, before the economic downturn of 07 and 08, if you look at those numbers up there, you can see that you basically averaged a K-12 increase of about 400 kids per year. After the downturn, you can see that number drop down a little bit where it's probably averaging in the 250, 260 range. And when you look at the last 4 years, you can see that you actually had probably an average increase of about 20 or 25 over the last several years. So in spite of some of this new growth, and some of it is already in place if you ride around certain portions of the county, and the growth that you've had, you've had a little bit of a leveling effect, and a lot of that is still related to the downturn in the economy from '07 and '08. You know, I love all this kind of stuff, and I'm gonna probably give this to Ron, but the city was very kind and gave us the individual detail or the count of the building permits by subdivisions for every year through that, and for the last 10 years. And when you look at that, you can see where a lot of that came into effect, because what you had a lot of subdivisions that started '06, '07, '08, didn't do a lot of development, 9, 10, and some of them have picked back up now and are picking back up. And I might just pass that around, I'm not just going to glance at that. Same chart for your K5. If you look at this, you will see, didn't have that much increase in K5. I'm gonna go back to 1. And when you look and see some of your numbers in the 400s, your K5 number was only about half, and in some cases, a lot less. Now, I want to look at and I'll talk more about that chart after I look at these next charts. I want to look a little bit at the general population and the history of your development data. I always like to look at the census data. Don't know how accurate annual estimates are, but people use them a lot for everything all the time. 2000 census, this is Hoover's population. You had 62,000 people. In 2010, that population was almost 82,000. Or a change of 30.08% for that 10-year period. Based on the 2015 estimate, which shows your population at 84,848, the change between 2010 and 2015 is only about 4%, that 3.96. So you can see where you were having that rapid growth when y'all first started the school system and became the draw and became the system most everybody wants to come to if they're coming into this area and so forth. That's what you saw. But that number is significantly down for the first 5 years of this period, between 2010 and 2015. You can see a big difference, big change. Now, what we've got here are the actual building permits. Now, the city was very kind and able to give us the detailed permits by year back to 2006. I really kind of hated to ask them to go back 20 years. I don't know if they'd even have those records, but Census Bureau keeps that stuff. And I checked the city data, your city data compared to census, and it's real close. Not the same number every year, but the same curve, the same line, and so forth. And if you look at that number, you can see in the blue, that's the census data from 95 through 2005. And you can see how those numbers averaged, again, in that 800 range that we were looking at earlier. But then you can see what's happened. You peaked as far as your building permits in 2000 anyway, in 2008, then dropped down a little bit and then in 2011 back up a little bit, but then been very steady. 2017 numbers were 267. And again, in spite of having all this growth, that's where your 2017 building permit numbers were. And y'all got paper. If you lay those charts over your enrollment chart, there's very little correlation between these numbers and your increase every year in your school population. One of the reasons for that, and this is just an average chart, is based on the homes that are selling. Right now, I don't know if any of you ever use Zillow, but for what I do, I look at it all the time. This is from last week. It's a real estate chart. They are showing for Hoover, the city of Hoover, 525 homes, and this is 4/4, which was Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. You had 525 homes for sale, 445, 80 new homes for sale, and 46 of those are in one development. That's Lake Wilburn and Black Ridge and all that. So most of your growth, most of your change has been coming, and I think will continue to come from turnover. And it's a wonderful thing to go on the Zillow site, if any of you ever get a chance to do it, and just look at the sales for the past year. it covers the whole city. There's not a gap. There's not, you see as much up here, all the way through, all the way down. Your home sales are spread throughout. You've got a few schools, and you'll see that in a little bit, that have very few. One, I don't think has any, do they? I forgot which one it is, but I think it's Bluff Park. Doesn't have any new subdivisions in it right now. But they're continuing to maintain their enrollment because of this right here. You're continuing to have those home sales. So even in schools and places where you don't have these new developments, you don't have the big 1,500 home developments and all those things, you're still going to keep getting enrollment because you're getting a lot of the resales. And where a lot of that comes from, you all know this as well as I do, people with younger kids, they not can buy a new $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 home, if they can buy a $210,000 resale or a $250,000 resale, and that's where you see a lot of this come in. Another thing that we have seen at this point, 15% new homes, 85%, this is one day last week. Ron talked to one of your builders and developers that's been here for about 20 years, and he said he has consistently seen about 10% of the homes that are sold are new homes, 90% basically resales. Very similar to the numbers that we're looking at here. And also another piece of consistency that you have, total homes sold, this is again according to Zillow on 4.4. If you look at it tonight, those numbers will be different. But you can get the last 12 months sales, 1955, 3966, 36 months, 5867. I'm an old math teacher. Anybody see a pattern there? Just about 2,000 homes a year are sold. Again, with about 85 to 90% of them being resales. And that has been consistent, and I think it will probably continue to be consistent. Now, I know you can't see all of this, but this is the 28 developments that we're looking at here. The city was very kind to give us a breakdown. This one is actually dated 12/31. I actually started working in January, late January, then I had to be away in February for some family visits. But so all the data is based on January numbers that we're seeing here. And as you look at this, you can see the total lots approved. You can see the total lots built, both single family, multifamily, and townhomes, and see the number available. On 12/31, there were 6,784 potential lots that have been approved at this point available to build. Here's the January 23rd number of those 28 developments, a little easier for everybody to see. 18,000 units or lots, 11,000 built, 6,800. Oh, don't put me in the paper. I'll take back what I said about you. And then as we look at these numbers, these are the numbers you just saw on this sheet. This is the breakdown by your elementary school zones. You can see 18,289, you'll see that at the bottom of every one of these. Deer Valley, Greystone, you can see Shades, South Shades and Brock's Gap has the 3,700 that are potential. And then you can see, I think the next one is probably Green Valley, isn't it? And Greystone, Trace Crossings, and so forth. Again, River Chase doesn't have that many. Shades Mountain doesn't have that many, but I think because of the resales, you're not going to see any drop of any kind in those schools either. Here's your middle school breakdown. You can see most of it is in Bumpus, and most of that's because of the South Shades and Brock Gap and so forth. But you can also see that more of it is in the Hoover High School area than it is in the Spain part. And if you look at the map over here, and again, you can tell by the middle schools, all that work, you can see where each one of those are. So, kind of a bottom line of where I see some of this data. I call this takeaways, for lack of a better word. I'm a math teacher, not an English teacher. District enrollment fairly stable over the past 5 years. The live birth rate has declined, but your ratio to your kindergarten and grade first, grade 1 has increased slightly over the past 2 years. Grade-to-grade survival ratios have increased. Increase over the past 5 years in K-5, and then a slight decline in your middle school numbers. Housing data takeaway. Currently, as of 1/23, 6,832 lots. And I guess I passed over that slide, but Between 1998 and 2007, you averaged 753 units per year being built. Apartments, single-family homes, and so forth, for that 10-year period when y'all were in your high-growth area. For the next 10-year period from 2008 through 2017, that number is not quite half, but probably at least 60%, where it was 414 units per year. 2017 is 267. Again, the takeaway I get from that, y'all are going to have growth. You're going to continue to have growth. You're going to continue to be a draw for living, for going to school, for people just wanting to be here, be in the Birmingham area. But I don't think there's a need for a state of panic. Because when you look at what you have been through and the planning both y'all have done and the city has done, you managed the 753 for that 10-year period. You managed the 414 very well during the last 10-year period. And right now you're at 267, probably will be running about 3 to 350 a year. When you actually read a lot of this information about these developments, you've got a lot of major developments through, I guess, experience and watching this all over the Southeast. I think there's several things you're probably going to see. Some of these will come along just like the developers want them to. Some of them won't. We may have some more ups and downs. But since our crash of 07 and 08 or whatever we call all of that, you know, a lot of builders don't want to get quite as extended as they did. You know, I knew builders at that time that had 50, 60, 70 homes that they were on the hook for that didn't sell for 2, 3, and 4 years. A lot of them went under. A lot of banks did the same thing. A lot of developers did the same thing. So what we've seen is a kind of a pulling in the reins of that, where there's not as much extension throughout on credit or on risk and so forth. So you will be seeing, I think, less coming in. It's like one of the big ones that you've got 1,100 or so homes. They were talking about doing 40 or 50 a year. So I've tried to look at that based on what I could find on each one of the individual developments and on experience. And also I've assumed 2 or 3 of those may not come near as quick as some people think. You've got a couple of those U.S. Steel developments that are going to have, I think, a few other questions come up, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, I guess. Between enrollment, housing, population, no direct correlation year to year between the permits and the school population. The current approved developments do not all have specific build-out plans, and as final developments materialize, and y'all have it here in Hoover just like everybody else, we're seeing more opposition than we did 15, 20 years ago to developments. You know, you're already, some people consider you already crowded. More people want to have a voice in it. More people are saying, no, let's wait a minute. Things don't go through quite as fast. And then the point I just made about the financial institutions and developers and so forth, not taking quite as much risk. So as a result of that, looking at all this information, looking at what you've got, and looking at your enrollment history, not just district-wide, but in each one of your individual schools, what I do, and I don't have a big database that I build all this around, it's I refer to my process a little more of art and science. It's based on a lot of numbers, a lot of spreadsheets, looking at a lot of data, but it's also based on a lot of experience and a lot of instinct. That's where the art part comes in. I will take each school, create a spreadsheet for each school. I'll look at what has happened in that school. I'll look at the development. I'll look at the potential development, how fast I think some of this is going to come in, and how the resales are going to affect it. And then for each school, and this is the exciting part to me, but again, probably very dull to most of it. For each school, I say, okay, what do I think this first grade to second grade number is going to do? Is it going to continue to go up? I think it may go up for the next 3 years, then I think it'll level off in year 4, 5, and 6, and I think it'll pick back up in 7 and 8. And I create a ratio for every school, every grade, every year to create those individual projections. Very intense. I guess I could have a big database. I mentioned to Kathy, the people that do that charge 3 to 4 times as much as I do, and it is right. But you know,
Thank you.
That's the way I do it. That's the way I like to do it. That's why I keep getting calls back and keep working with people over the years, even into my 70s. You may be wise. What I have done, and speaking of being in the 70s, I kind of sort of been told I have cataracts. So I've tried to make these in your school colors. I may miss some of them because I may not can pick the color up from their website as well. What you're looking at here is one of my summary spreadsheets. You've got the history, and then in one color, and then the second color are the projected numbers starting next year. And again, these include the changes that Ron had made as far, or y'all have made as far as the potential attendance zone changes and so forth. And as we look at those, want to just kind of run through those. But again, I take each one of them, I look at them, and this is the final sheet that you see. Looking at Bluff Park, again, I think that's one of those where you don't have a lot of new housing, but actually not looking at a lot of changes. You are doing an attendance zone change, and that's why that dropped this year. But then going up a little bit and then leveling off over the next several years. Now, Deer Valley, you are making a zone change there. And you're also going from the K4 to the K5, so you've got two separate numbers up there. The yellow are basically the K4, and then the projected number is showing it declining just a little bit because most of the development there has leveled off, but you'll still have resales and so forth going through there. Now, Green Valley's got a good bit of development, so this is what I think we're looking at here, a potential increase going up into the 550s in about 3 or 4 years, and then leveling off in that 520 range. Greystone, been declining significantly, I think for Hoover anyway, over the last several years. But again, with some of the things that we're looking in potential development and so forth, and a lot of the resale potential there, I see that moving back up into that 450 range. Wind, a lot of development going on there, even though it's actually declined about 40 over the last 3 or 4 years. You can see I'm looking at that one possibly going up to about 740. River Chase, fairly stable, probably the most stable one that I'm looking at. And I think that'll continue to be the case. You've got a little more commercial development in there and so forth. So you will have some housing, you will have turnover, but you'll have a little more of that turn commercial. Rocky Ridge showing it fairly level and then bumping up several years down the road based on when I was estimating. Well, I'm glad you decided to join us.
Sorry.
You've missed a lot of good stuff. But as we look at those, I think that one will be fairly stable during that time. Shades Mountain, you can see that we're showing that. Some of that is an increase in the attendance on next year, but then fairly level over the several years. Now, here's where you get into some of those that will change. And if you notice, we're saying K2 on South Shades Crest because that's your new organization. That's based on the potential K2 coming in there, showing it being 376. The ones that are there now, 388 next year, and basically almost doubling in the next 7 to 10 years. Brock Scout, that history is the South Shades Crest 3-4. And then, but what we're looking at is basically that one going up just the 3-5. So between the two of those, which will share an attendance zone, we're looking at a little over 1,200 kids. Trace Crossings, attendance zone change there and an organizational change, K4 to K5. And we're looking at it going up into the 700 range. When you look at the map and look where a lot of the development is, a lot of that big speculative development is down in here, down in this area. You've got a few other areas around, but this is where most of the potential big ones and so forth. And I'm not assuming all of that's going to get built. I think some of it will be delayed for various reasons. So that's why the numbers are what you see. Now, Barry, you're making a slight change there this year and looking at it possibly going up to around 1,300 over the next several years. Office, a lot of stuff going on there. Right now, though, that number's, and that current number, the orange numbers are 7.8. The projected numbers are your 6.8, which will be the organization based on next year. It going up to 1,200 also. Simmons going up close to 1,200 as we move through. You've got the change there, and then the Hoover High showing a little leveling. You're making a change this year of 60 to 70 kids, something like that. So we're showing it leveling for the next 3 or 4 years, but then picking back up to around 3,200 in the next 10 years. And then Spain Park, with the attendance home change and immediate bump there, I'm looking at 51, I guess 61. And then up to about 1853, so I'd make it a little closer to Hoover when you get through. So that's what each one of the individual schools look like. Again, now for your elementaries, that is just the K-5, well, they're all the K-5, not except two, but the K-2, 3-5. You will have, but no pre-K included in that, so whatever y'all do on pre-K will need to be added to it. Those are the individual school projections. I create another projection too that I refer to the district-wide projection. It will be just a little different. I do it different. The individual schools, as we talked about a while ago, I bore into each grade, each school, each year. With the district-wide, I look at your overall number. So those of you that have done a lot of the math stuff before, the ratios are different. So these numbers don't come out to exactly the same. At one time I thought about making them the same, but no, this gives you another set of numbers, and I think a good second look at what we might have. I think the actual 10-year number, though, is only 4 or 5 different, but in between it will vary some from the individual school. Here's what your district-wide projection. This is not the sum of each school. This is the big district-wide projection. We're looking at your elementary where it's been fairly stable over the next several years, going up to 68, 6,900. Actually, fairly soon, probably within 7 years, you'll be at that 6,800 range. Middle school numbers, although they have actually gone down, your 6-8 numbers have gone down a little bit. Looking at them going up to about 3,600 in the next 10 years. High school numbers moving from 45 to 49, almost 5,000 on your high school. And then your whole K-12 number moving from the current 13,964 to 15,475, about a 1,500 increase over that time period. Now these are the individual school projections, and what I mentioned, the 4 pages that are the summary, that are the kind of the bottom line of everything we're working on. That's what these are. This is what we refer to as your capacity analysis sheets. This is this fall's numbers, that official state 20th day after Labor Day. See the organization that you have this year. Student capacity, Ron has provided to me of 17,886. And then the K-12 enrollment, whether it's over or under capacity, and then the utilization, which is basically just a mathematical evaluation of the enrollment to the building capacity. And we've highlighted on here anything over 90%. So you can see right now Berry's at 92%. You've got Bluff Park and Deer Valley at a little over 100. River Chase is a little over 90. Then if we look at next year, this is next year's numbers. This is the projections that you saw on those individual charts for each school. You will see next year that we're looking at a potential of 13,846. 93% at Berry, 93% at Bluff Park, 91% at Gwen, but altogether about a 77% utilization ratio. If you look up at that high school number, 86 and 81%, I've generally, as an old facility planner, considered 85% is a pretty good place to be. You know, you can generally handle most everything that you need to. And another thing you need to think about with your high schools, you've got a lot of kids that aren't there for every period, every day. You know, you've got various programs, you know, I don't know what you'll call all your programs. You're also creating a new school that will take some of them out. So, you know, basically you're not going to be in a very crowded situation because you're going to have a lot of the kids that are in different places during the day. But you can see Berry, we're still looking at 94% there. I still like 85 as a good rule of thumb that you want to try to get to, and then 93 and 91 on your 2 elementaries. Here's 5 years down the road, 22, 23. We're up to 87% on your high schools. Berry's up to 97%. Bluff Park, Rocky, and River Chase are still in that 90-something% range. You can see Brock's Gap is down to 45, but you know that's a big school, and you've made that organizational change and so forth. That will be 3-5, and then you got K2 on South Shades. And then as we look 10 years down the road, 27, 28, 97%, 100% on Berry, 92% on Bluff Park, 98 and 92 and River Chase. Here's a summary, a bottom line summary of all four of those. This year, potential next year, potential 22, 23, and then potential 27, 28. So this gives you an overall summary of what I think that that you're going to have next year and over the next 10 years. So, Dr. Murphy, that's my spiel. I think I stayed within my time.
You did. Thank you so much. Board members, you certainly may have questions, and do our best to answer those questions.
You mentioned that real good number in Georgia, and not going too far on that one. I guess that was district enrollment necessarily.
What's that now?
That real good number in Georgia. Is that due to buildings? Is it due to sports? Is it due to development? Why would you get a good survival number? I guess that's what you were talking about when you said that.
No, it ain't a good survival number.
Oh, it's not.
No.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry. No, it goes the other way. They lose about 45% of their kids from ninth grade to 12th. No, it ain't good. You don't want to do that.
No, that's not.
Yeah, no, and frankly, you know, I have probably now worked with 30 to 35 districts in Alabama. In the 80s and 90s, I worked with about that many in Mississippi, and then I was with our State Department over facilities and transportation in Georgia and looked at all of Valley. Your survival ratios in your high school, in both high schools, not just the summary of the two, is one of the best ones I've ever seen. It's just really unbelievable. You know, most superintendents would love to have that kind of number. So, you know, and what that tells you, that the teachers, the administrators, the people that work in the instructional and the high school and the middle school program are really doing something good to hold those kids that long. And so I think y'all will continue to have that because y'all are considered the draw. You know, my grandkids live in Arkansas. Well, two of them live in Alabama now. One's out in Tuscaloosa, one went to North UNA. But they went to Bentonville, which is the quote Hoover of Arkansas. You know, always considered the best school and so forth. And they opened the second high school just like y'all did 10 and 15 years ago. And so I think of that when I think of y'all. This is where everybody talks about. You know, I've actually told a couple of the superintendents want to hire me. I'm working for Hoover. One of them actually told me, and I'm going to tell you who it was. Hoover doesn't need anything. They have everything. So y'all will continue to be the draw, and I think one of the reasons is those numbers that you saw on those high school. Your ability to hold the kids, maintain the interest of the kids, the parents, and your community. You just got an awful lot of support for what you're doing because what you're doing is working and it's good stuff. And based on what I saw in that note I had wrapped in that $20 bill, and it's really improved in the last 2 years, right?
There you go. Actually, board members, if you would look at the capacity analysis sheet, because I believe this data brings us to having to have some philosophical conversations with each other. And I believe the primary conversation that we're going to need to have is at what percentage of projected capacity do we sound an alarm that says we better get an architectural firm on board, we need to begin some design, and we need to begin to project out when we would open some additional classrooms. I do not think it's wise for us, as you look at the one that's in front of you, you know, we have 2 schools right now at 100% plus an ounce. And Mr. Salmon, has indicated to us that 85% is kind of a good spot to be. But as you look at where we are currently, and as you look at where we're going to continue to move to, we're going to need to have some conversations about that. What I am not seeing, and you all, Ron, you can certainly jump in and join the chorus, I am not seeing the urgency of a third high school at this point, with a few assumptions. With the assumption that we are going to be able to provide to Hoover High School some additional relief through the opening of the River Chase Career Connection Center. We're going to have that relief. So there are some caveats to what I'm saying to you. But I do think you can see we're going to need to add some classrooms to a number of our buildings, with the most immediate being Berry Middle School. It's the only middle school in the feeder zone, and we're going to need to have some capacity there. What we did this morning, Tina, Michelle, Tracy, Mr. Mugg, was to sit at the table and say, now that we have this impact study, and now that we're thinking that 85%, maybe a little bit more, what do we now need to do in terms of the next year, the next few years? And so this evening during the regular board meeting, Tina's got this. She's gonna run with it. Tell us what we need to do. So, but I do want to ask you all, as the leading body to the school district, we need to think at what capacity are we going to start to engage architects and shovels. It's clear to me we're going to have some schools that are going to have some additions.
Starting with very middle.
Barry, would you be your starting point? Any objections, Dr. Robbins?
No, ma'am.
And you'll see this evening, we'll share with you several of our schools. As we think about Bluff Park, and we have some suggestions and some conversations we'd like to have with you this evening once we get into the regular session of our board meeting, to talk about some of those respective schools.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned there's a little correlation between building permits and student growth here at Hoover.
I do not see a direct correlation because what I tried to look for, okay, as the building permits come in, what does the enrollment do 2 and 3 years down the road? I did not see that direct correlation between building permits and immediate numbers in your school.
Okay, if you've got that situation and you've got a student survival rate, grade to grade of 1, everybody stays where they are, keeps progressing through the district. What's the indicator that you may have some growth issue popping up that you don't really notice? I mean, granted, you look at overall aggregate numbers, you look at building capacities.
Now, I think there's 2 or 3 things. I think one, we could have, and I would suggest that you do this, and gosh, hopefully I'll be quit by then, every 2 or 3 years, because this could change. You know, my assumptions are based on what I think each one of these developments are going to do. It could come quicker, it could come slower, but also that turnover that I think you're having in your home sales, and those new home sales where you're selling 450 plus or minus homes a year, I think they are being sold as a general rule now, this is an assumption, by people that have been here, had their kids go through, and then they're moving on, and they're being replaced by people who want to be in the city or in the school here. So that's where a lot of that's coming from. That's why you have, I think you will continue to have that kind of constant turnover because of the resales as well as how fast some of these come on.
There are some, what we call today, contingency factors, and I'm going to jump a little bit ahead of us, Tina, and share the contingency factors. There are some things for which we have no control. For examples of that would be if our city chose to annex additional pieces of property, and what does that impact to us? If we now know about the 6,800 units, which could be a single family home or 1 unit in a multifamily residence, okay? So when we talked about unit, that was the definition of that. And so if those units change from single family to multifamily or change to townhome or change to whatever, any of those changes we have no control over and would have to adjust accordingly. If there were decisions made to move X number of units from site A to site B by our city, that's a contingency for which we would need to be able to think and plan for. And then with Whit sitting here in the room, we obviously are exceptionally thoughtful about the future conversations and decisions that'll be made by our federal judge based on unitary status, and those are some unknowns, at least all those decisions as they might unfold. And those are things for which we will have to be prepared to adjust. So as we brainstorm today, and I may have missed some, but those were some of the things that we would clearly say could impact everything you have in front of you and are matters for which we have limited control over those matters.
You know, another thing that you don't address, and it's not your charge to address, is the fact that even though we keep kids in theory, numerically, from K through 12, we have a very high transiency rate. Kids come and go. So where that manifests itself is in academic performance, primarily. And that's the thing that we're trying to get an understanding on, because even though it seems like you got these kids that are born into Hoover, they transition out of Hoover into college or elsewhere, you've got a lot of churn in there, and kids coming in below grade level in often cases and leaving before they're, it's a very complicated situation in terms of academic assessment.
And these numbers really don't account for them, because it's kind of the average of what does take place. So that's kind of a separate look, so to speak. Yeah.
Ron, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you had some numbers on transiency, the transition of kids in and out of our school district. Can you
Yeah, between,
recall?
I don't remember the exact number, but between October, we submitted data to the court in October, and then we submitted again in February, and their first glance, was this must be wrong, because these numbers are so different. And no, they were due to the fact that we had something like 600 or 700 kids come in and out of the system in that 3-month interval of time. And
Say that again, Ron?
about 600 or 700 students in and out of the system.
That's what we're dealing
Yeah,
with
so
the transiency.
It's like these can't be from the same school year. Yeah, they are from the same school year. It's due to that high churn that we have. But a lot of that's both external to Hoover, but it's also internal to Hoover. That's also students who are withdrawing from one of our elementary schools and re-enrolling in another elementary school because they've changed addresses during the year. So it's a lot.
A lot of movement.
You did a great job. I appreciate it.
Thank you, glad to.
So,
Again, I would suggest for y'all's situation, I do this every at least 3 years as you go through.
I'm just glad I wasn't in your math class. I'm glad I wasn't in your math class.
I was pretty good. 3 or 4 of them are CFOs. But I was mean too,
I bet that's not true.
Anyway, anything else, Dr. Murphy?
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Appreciate it. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, or, well, let's take a 35-minute break, and we'll start the board meeting at 5:30 as scheduled. Thank you.
It's all on there. Well, one thing.